So I got into writing about personal finance content. When me and my previous spouse were married, I got married at 19. We started off with $55,000 of debt and we never earned a ton of money. Like we were very average income earners. I think our combined income never surpassed like 80,000. I worked a bunch of super normal jobs. Um, but we invested in real estate, invested in the stock market, and kept our expenses low. And by 32, I was financially independent. And we left our jobs. And it's been 10 years now doing kind of this non traditional path. But along the way, because we had so much debt and we weren't high earners, I never thought we could retire early. Never, ever, ever did I thought we would be FI when I was 32. So I kind of hatched this plan like maybe we could retire often. Like because we had these really ambitious goals and dreams and things that didn't fit alongside the 9 to 5 really well. And I didn't want to wait till I was 65 to like enjoy the best parts of life.
So convince me why retiring often beats retiring early. Because as you know, everyone in the FI community, it's a race to hit that FI number. And at that point, you
Yeah.
never have to work again. Whether you hit the FI number when you're 30 or 40 or 50, whatever early retirement might mean to you, why is retiring often better in some cases?
Well, you're kind of a fitness person. So if someone comes to you and they're like, "Oh my gosh, I'm going to run a marathon. It's going to be awesome. I'm going to be so good at it actually." And you're like, "That's great." They're like, "Yeah, I've been like listening to podcasts about marathons and I've read a couple books about marathons." And you're like, "That's so cool. Like have you like do you ever run? Have you done a 5K?" They're like, "No, no, no. I'm not going to do a 5K because I just want to get to this marathon as fast as possible and then I'm going to crush it." And you're like, "Dude, I don't know if that's a great idea. Maybe you should practice a little bit." "No, I don't need any practice. I'm going to be great at it. It's going to be awesome. I was built for marathons." And you're like, but you've never done it, right?" You're like, "Nope, nope, never done it." And then like mile 17, they have muscle cramps and they're like carrying them off in a stretcher. I've seen my previous spouse was in the military. And so there was a bunch of people that worked crazy hard for 20 years and they got really good at working and they were obsessed with their careers. And at 40, they retired and it did not go well. It was a rough transition because they never had that opportunity to practice. The reason my book's called Retire Often and not like do one epic mini retirement is that every time you do it, you get better at it. You figure some stuff out, you cross some things off the list. It's almost a capital investment into your future like self. Whether you are doing this capital investment in your relationships, in your health, in your hobbies, in learning how to travel well, you put up this big investment of time and energy and money, and then that just continues to pay dividends um, for the rest of your life. And then that transition into early retirement, if you've done 6 or 7 mini retirements, like so easy, so smooth, like so much more enjoyable. And I've seen a lot of people push super hard for 10, 15 years. And then they get into early retirement and it's harder. This marathon's actually a bit trickier than they expected. And they get so discouraged by the fact that this is a little bit harder than they expected. They just go back to work. And part of me is like, why did you push so hard for 15 years and then bail? But it doesn't have to be that difficult of a transition.
So let's dive into the tactical. So listeners don't know, but before we started recording a couple of weeks ago, you sent over the full PDF version of your book. You're like, try to get through it. I'm like, I'm kind of busy. I'm not sure if I'll be able to get through it. So you sent over your workbook. I'm like, oh, it's a workbook. It's going to have like 10, 20 pages, some exercises. This workbook had 107 pages in it. So there's a lot of tactical when it comes to these mini retirements and retiring often. What are some of the most important pieces of a mini retirement? Like, I can't imagine you just advise people to go in blindly, take 6 months off with no purpose. Like, do people, when they go into these mini retirements, is there a set amount of time? Is there a certain thing that they should be trying to get out of each mini retirement? I know this is a very open-ended question. You
Yeah.
can take this in any direction you want to go, Jillian.
You should do a little bit of planning. A mini retirement is a huge investment. of time, of money, of energy. Don't wing it. Don't wing it because you've also never done it before. So you're not super prepared and it will go off the rails. And I hear, in the workbook or in my book, there's kind of 4 steps. And whenever I hear of a person's mini retirement that's a little disappointing, I'm very quickly like, oh, they skipped like 2 of the steps. Maybe they got 1 or 2 of them, but they kind of skipped half the process. And it's not overwhelmingly difficult to prepare, but I would put in some time. And so the first kind of real easy way for this to go off the rails is people are like, I've got this bucket list. I'm going to do 87 things during my mini retirement. I'm going to be crazy productive. And the reality is, there's a lot of things that don't pair very well together. If you think about kind of like ingredients, maybe you've got like apples and garlic and lemons, and like there's not a lot of things that all 3 of those go together well. So, someone might say, even just out of the 87, they're like, I'm really burned out. I need to recover from burnout. I want to do extensive travel. I've never gotten to travel through Europe. I want to see like 20 countries. And I want to start a side hustle. Okay, you can't do all 3 of those things on the same day. Those don't fit together. Recovering from burnout, starting a side hustle, and going through 20 countries, you're not going to do any of them really well. So I encourage people in kind of this first step is to just narrow it down to 3 things, but also create distinct phases of your mini retirement. So don't try to do all 3 things on any given day. In phase 1, kind of set up how much time phase 1 is going to be. Let's say you have 3 months. So month 1 is phase 1 is just recover from burnout. And then every day you optimize just to recover from burnout. In the book, I talk about like finding active rest, like activities that are restful and giving yourself a little bit of structure. Because if you're like, I'm just going to like chill out my house, you might not actually rest. It oftentimes what'll happen is it gets filled up with like mundane things that don't really feel restful. You're going to the dentist and you're running errands and you're picking up a prescription and you're unloading the dishwasher and you're vacuuming, and at the end of the day you're like, I don't know if I actually feel more rested. Like it was just kind of a boring day. So picking those active rest activities, whether, for you it's reading a book or taking a bath or going to lunch with a friend or doing yoga or going for a run, going to the farmer's market, like whatever that looks like for you. But in each phase, pick that primary intention, because then you can spend a month traveling through Europe and doing that whirlwind thing. And then when you come home, you have another month to really focus on getting this side hustle off the ground. And you'll do each 3 to the best of your ability.
And for each one of these phases, we'll talk about length in a little bit, because obviously this is going to differ with employer and just your current work situation and like how long you're able to finagle your mini retirement. But so let's say you want to squeeze 3 different things in. Is a 3-month mini retirement long enough? Does it have to be 6 months, a year? What do you typically recommend for each one of those phases so you don't feel burnt out at the end of your mini retirement?
I recommend, so in general, I recommend starting small. There is a tendency, like kind of like a go big or go home. Like if I'm going to do a mini retirement, I'm going to do a year. I'm going to travel around the world. But there again, if we think about, that's kind of like a half marathon. Like, why don't we start with a 5K? Like, why don't we start with a couch to 5K kind of thing? Because it's tough to mess up a month. A year, the risk reward ratio starts to skew a little bit if you haven't had some practice. So start with a month, start with 2 months, start with, what you can reasonably get either negotiating from your employer or between jobs. And then that builds, you'll see the magic in it. You'll be like, oh my gosh, this was so good. And that builds your confidence to take a year off, but it also builds your skill set to really execute that year off really well. So I encourage people, like, start with something small if possible. And I know people who have never done a mini retirement and then do an around the world trip with their family for a year. And it's possible. It's just a little bit, it can be daunting for people to jump in to something that big if they don't have that confidence and that experience. And then how long each thing takes. The toughest one to determine is your burnout. But I would look at how many years have you been pushing hard? and be real honest with yourself. Um, I know some people in their 20s that are like, I've been pushing hard for 4 years. Okay, maybe a month. I know some people in the early 40s that are like, I've been working hard since I was 14. Like, I've got 20, 30 years of nonstop pushing myself past my limits. Like, yeah, a month ain't gonna cut it. That's not gonna work. That might be 6 months. That might be a year. I know people who were in incredibly demanding jobs that it was 2 or 3 years before they actually felt themselves coming back to life.
Now, from a mathematical standpoint, I think
Mhm.
this is where we might butt heads. I'm not sure exactly. Convince me why. So, obviously, financial independence, it's all about front loading the money, right? Compound interest.
Mhm.
Like the earlier you get your money in the market, the earlier and the more money you get in the market, the more it's going to compound. Like Warren Buffett made 99% of his money after 65 because he had all those years to compound. Won't taking mini retirements kind of stunt that journey a little bit? Like if I'm taking a 6 months off every couple of years, I'm not going to have way less money to stockpile and put in my investment portfolio earlier on, which is then going to affect the compound interest for later on.
So this is a little counterintuitive because if you look at the math straight on and you only factor in the two factors, lost income and extra expense, then it would indicate you would come out behind. But life is a little bit more nuanced, and there's actually a lot more factors that come into play. Some that you can kind of anticipate, and some you can't anticipate at all. When you create space in your life, other stuff comes into it, sometimes stuff you didn't even see coming. And there's actually you can be incredibly strategic about this if you're in that beginning stage. So one of the guys who took a mini retirement, and this sounds like an outlier, it kind of isn't. He had worked at a company for 15 years, took a year long mini retirement. When he went back into work, his next job, he had a 50% raise, and his signing bonus covered 75% of the cost of that year off. Now, actually, mathematically, he came out very far behind because he didn't take multiple mini retirements. If he would have every 3 years taken a mini retirement and realized that increased value he was bringing to a company in terms of higher pay, his lifetime earning potential over those 15 years would have been so much higher. He left so much money on the table by not taking mini retirements. Like, and I'm so glad he took the one when he did when he was at 15 years in, because there again, lifetime earning potential so much higher. But there's a lot of ways you can, if you're still in that wealth accumulation, you can be strategic about this. Like you can start a side hustle during a month-long mini retirement. Like it's a great time to jumpstart something. There again, that capital investment that you can maintain later on. During two of my mini retirements, we bought real estate. Actually, the house I'm in right now, we bought as a rental 12 years ago. And the last 12 years have been good for real estate. But honestly, any 12-year period, you're probably going to get some growth. Um, but we paid just on a number sense, we paid 110. We've probably put another 90 in it. So we're probably in this house for 200. We took a month off to buy it, to renovate it, to get it rented, to like kind of do all of that upfront work 12 years ago. And it's worth just over 500,000 now. So you could say, well, look, you took a month off. You lost like $3,000. You could have been working. That $3,000 could have been compounding these 12 years. And whatever extra expense you had, but we also came out like $300,000 ahead. So if you're in wealth accumulation, I think be strategic about it. Another thing that I talk about in the workbook or the book is kind of this capability cost matrix. So when think about your different like levels of capability as you age. Where are you now? Where might you be in the decades to come? And how much do things cost? And I encourage people look at things in your 20s and 30s that require a high degree of capability. You have to be able to be really physically capable and are low cost. Like pick that in the 4 square quadrant. focus on that quadrant first, because when you're 70, you can do the things that require less capability and are super expensive because you've had 60 years of compound interest working for you. You can do the luxury around the world cruise. 70-year-olds love cruising and they don't mind dropping 30 grand. So, but in your 20s, you can do a road trip in a van across the US for 3 months and have a great time, even if it requires, sleeping on frozen ground.
All right, there is so much stuff I love in that answer. I know I was kind of just like poking your buttons a bit. I am 100% on board with the math because even my co-host Justin, who funny enough is on a mini retirement right now, he's traveling around the world for 6 months, doing 4 months in Southeast Asia, 2 months in Europe. If he were to have just stayed in his job and didn't jump around, and it wasn't maybe mini retirements, he would take like a couple months off in between. He wasn't taking years off. It would have taken him probably 50 years with the average 3% raises to get to what he was earning when he hit FI, because he was job
Yeah.
hopping so much. It sounds like the person in your case study, he was able to multiply his income many times over because he was intentional, and he could kind of step back almost a 10,000 foot view and assess the lay of the land and be like, actually, this job in this industry, I have those skills. This one pays double what I was just making. And so like, I think another awesome thing about mini retirements is it allows you to step back, get out of the day to day, see what other opportunities are out there. Because many people just go through their life, their career, just doing the same thing over and over for 40 years without ever picking their head up. And maybe they could have transitioned into an industry where they made more, or they were more fulfilled, or they had more options, or they had more vacation time. So I just wanted to highlight that. That was the first thing. And I love this cost capability matrix. That was the second thing I wanted to highlight, because I have a perfect example of this. I think the one you had in your diagram, was it Machu Picchu? Am I remembering that
Yeah.
correctly? It was like the highest cost, highest capability. So my wife and I, Lauren, when we went on we did like a little, I was going to call it a honeymoon, but it was kind of an elopement hybrid. But we were in Bali and there was this hike, and there was this like 65-year-old man, and he had done this little waterfall thing, this waterfall tour before us. And he's like, oh, I only had time to do 2 out of the 3 waterfalls. So make sure like you budget and you pick which waterfalls you want to see, because you had 2 hours to walk around. So we go and do this thing. We're hustling and we're like, oh, we really want to see all 3 waterfalls. Took us 30 minutes. So we're like, oh, this guy is just very slow. And 70, he's in like the top left corner of this matrix where he has the money to spend, but he has no capability anymore. Like he probably should have done this waterfall hike in his 20s or his 30s or his 40s when he could get around a lot faster. So he wouldn't only have to see 2 out of the 3. So I just love this framing, because I think too often people are like, oh, don't wait to retire because then you're not going to be able to do those high capability things. But it's like, you can still do stuff when you retire at a traditional age, 65. Just be intentional what those things are. It could be the cruises, it could be volunteering, it could be other things like that that are a little more low capability, but just having the framework allows you to actually like decide like, okay, we're turning 50 next year, let's like do this Europe thing now while we still have working legs, and then maybe later on we can start to do some cruises and some more slow leisurely travel. So I just love this framing, because I haven't really heard anyone talk about this before.
And one of the exercises in the book that kind of follows that is, if you create a timeline of every decade of your life, think about, you have all these ideas, all these goals, all these dreams. Start to plot out which ones fit best in which decade. In that 20s, 30s, it might be really low cost, high capability. But, in your case, by the time you get to your 30s, early 40s, if you've been on this FI journey and like you have more money, you can do those high cost, high capability ones. Knock those out before your capability starts to shrink. And then in the back end, do those higher cost. My sister, for her 17th birthday, I was living in Europe. I took her to Paris for the weekend because I'm awesome. We went to a Dave Matthews Band because I'm 42,
awesome.
and that's like peak experience. But we drove in our Honda Civic. We camped at this like really crappy campground in the middle of town. There was like this thing in Europe where people could pay you to give them a ride, like a ride share thing. But it was like, it was like couch surfing in the early 2000s. It had a weird vibe. So we had these weird strangers that rode with us. And so we actually made money on the trip. And that was so fun. And I'm so glad I did it. But if I'm 60, if I'm 70 and I have more money, like I'm doing like super cushy hotels, fancy meals. Like I'm going to have a very different Paris experience. But I love that I had this really janky Dave Matthews Band camping experience with my sister because she's 17 and like it's the perfect age to do janky, fun stuff like that.
I 100% I 100% agree. Lauren and I were actually just talking about we did like a little backpacking trip where we traveled around Australia and New Zealand when we were God, what was I, 22 and she was 20, and we were sleeping in the car eating tuna and beans and we're like never again, but those experiences were amazing. We talk about the stories all the
Yeah.
time, but I'm like now I'm going to get an Airbnb. I'm not sleeping in a RAV4 when it's 40 out and eating tuna with the seat at 45 degrees. Like I'm just not doing that anymore. But there's a time and a place for it. So just mapping that out in your timeline is so important.
Yeah.
So I want to jump into the kind of framing of mini retirements. I think, let me see if I can pull it up in your workbook here. There's like 10 different dream outcomes or goals, or I forget the
Mhm.
exact verbiage you used, but can you just talk about those a little bit, like what those, again, correct my verbiage here, but what those like 10 dream goals or outcomes are that you can choose from in a mini retirement? Because we talked about like, how long do you need for each phase, but we didn't really talk about like what
Mhm.
things you could get out of each phase.
Yeah, mini retirements are a little bit like a Swiss Army knife. They can
Okay.
fulfill so many different functions, which is incredible. And so in the workbook or the book, I kind of list out like here are the 10 most common ones. And they typically have like two themes in common. It's stuff that doesn't fit into nights and weekends. If you want to hike the Camino, you're not doing it on a 4-day weekend. Like you need extended amounts of time. I did a 10-week trip to 10 national parks with my kids in a pop-up when they were super little. You're not doing that over a 4-day weekend. Like if you're going to do these cool things, you need a bigger chunk of time to do them. And oftentimes people optimize for things that seasons of life that have expiration dates. You have this sense of, gosh, if I don't do this now, I might not get to do it. Maybe your parents are young and healthy now and they can hike through Ireland with you. Maybe you are at this like peak physical capability and you can do these more adventurous things. Maybe your kids are little and you're like, if we don't do like the Disney pass or like I've bought so many season passes to like Universal Studios. Like if we don't do this now, like this isn't going to hold for 20 years. In 20 years, my kids aren't going to spend, 8 weeks going to Universal with me. Um, so for a lot of people, it's extended travel, slow travel, because slow travel is just an entirely different thing than a quick week-long vacation. Whole different vibe, whole different experience. For some people, it's like working on a big project, a project around their house or kind of a big dream. If they dreamed of writing a book or being in a band, they have this time where they can really focus on those things. Quality time with their core family, that capital investment, but also time with extended family. Man, after you like graduate high school and you're out in the real world, the amount of time you get with your cousins and with your aunts and uncles and your grandparents, it's just so finite between regular holidays and work and your vacations and all your friends are getting married. You have such limited time that there's just not enough to go around. Keeping in contact with the people you went to high school with or college with, like maintaining those friendships takes a lot of intention if you want to have those when you become early retired. It's very possible to show up in early retirement and be like, oh, shoot, I don't have a lot of friends left, actually. Like, I've been hustling for so long, I kind of neglected all of those relationships. Um, People's health, it took me 4 6 months. I took a mini retirement um, to lose weight and get in shape. I hit 40 and I was like, oh, this is different than when I was 24. Actually, how I have to care for my body, there's like a whole new set of rules. And it takes some time to learn those rules and practice those rules and figure that stuff out. Um, and especially for for moms and for women, like it it's tough to be like, actually I'm important. Like my health is important, my wellness is important. I should maybe take some time and learn how to take care of myself. Um, Recovering from burnout right now is a huge thing, especially in the US in any work centric culture. Um, or up leveling, starting side hustles, investing in real estate, up leveling your career. A lot of people take these mini retirements and they either do courses or certifications or up level their soft skills. You go to Toastmasters, you do intensive therapy, like you do the stuff that's going to make you a high performer.
So I'm convinced from a goals perspective, and I'm speaking for a lot of our listeners, people in the FI community, myself included, have trouble spending money and trouble cutting
Mm,
off that income stream. I know you convinced
yeah.
me, like, you can quit, you can come back, and in 6 months you might have a higher paying job. But even just like in those 6 months, it might hurt, like not having that income come in and you're worried about spending money here or there. How do you budget for this type of thing? Like, what are you doing from a personal finance perspective to make these mini retirements work?
So in the FI community, this spreadsheet is the easiest part. Like they can rock a spreadsheet. They know what their expenses are. They can, outline. It's funny in my group coaching, it's 4 months and we do a month for each step. But a lot of the people in the group coaching are in the FI community. So we have a whole month for finance. And I'm like, okay, guys, we got to find other stuff to talk
Uh-oh.
about. Like,
Yeah.
we don't need this much time. Like, let's talk about extended travel. Like, let's incorporate bonus topics into these calls, because me telling you, here's how you figure out your baseline budget. And then here's your adventure, whatever you're going to do. And here's how you figure out the budget for that. And then you just save that amount of money. Easiest part of the equation. The hardest part of the equation is giving yourself permission and dealing with the fear. And it's fascinating to me, kind of going back to our marathon example, where people will be like, I'm terrified to run a 5K. Like, I see all these bad outcomes if I run a 5K. But as soon as I'm ready to run that marathon, I'm going to be awesome. I won't be fearful at all. I won't be scared at all. I'm terrified about the 5K, but the marathon, that'll be easy. And then they get stuck in one more year syndrome. So dealing with that fear, dealing with that hesitation, because it is like, earning money, saving money, high savings rate, it's like driving down the interstate at like 80 miles an hour. And then retiring or taking a mini retirement kind of feels like popping that thing in reverse. Like it's just a little disorientating. But it's good to start to deal with that and to work through all those emotional, mental things in small chunks. Because if you've saved $100,000, $200,000, $300,000, taking a month off, spending an extra $3,000, like if you can't develop the courage to do that, I think you really need to re-examine this idea of early retirement, because I don't know if you're going to be able to pull the lever when you get there. It takes courage, but being successful, you take a month off and you're like, oh my gosh, the world didn't burn down. I actually had an amazing time. This was a great use of my money. I should do this again. And then you do a 3-month one and a 6-month one. And by the time you get to early retirement, you're like, yeah, I love spending the money that I've saved. Actually, I love using it to make my life better. And I know exactly how to do that.
Is there any type of equation for how much you should aim to spend on a mini retirement? I'm guessing some people, when they think about these life goals, it does involve world travel. It might involve some
Mhm.
extravagant things. Maybe it's some cruise. Maybe it's some trip to some country that they've always wanted to visit. But you don't want it to break the bank. Like if you're just getting started on
Yeah.
your FI journey or you're $100,000 in debt, you don't want to go take a $20,000 1 month trip, probably. Maybe I'm wrong,
Mhm.
but probably not. So is there
Yeah.
some kind of budgetary guidelines or like percentage of net worth or percentage of savings that
Mhm.
you help people aim for?
So I don't know if this is an aim for percentage, but this is what I commonly see. I've seen lots of
Okay.
people's mini retirement budgets. And how it usually shakes out is about 50% of their monthly take home pay is how much additional they spend a month
Okay.
on the high end. So if you're bringing home $5,000, they might spend an extra 2,500. And I like that if you're trying to gauge, because it should kind of be proportional to your income. If you're only making 2,000 a month, spending an extra $1,000 on your mini retirement is very appropriate, and it's not going to set you back. I took a mini retirement maybe 6 months ago, and 1 month, I took 1 month off of work, and I spent $1,000 to learn tango for a month, and it was awesome. I had so much fun, and tango's super hard. So like I'm not great at it, but there again, capital investment. Now I have this skill, I have this hobby that I can do for the rest of my life. That is, I could go on about all the things I love about tango, but making it proportionate where if you're earning $10,000 a month, it's very appropriate to spend an extra $5,000 on your mini retirement. And honestly, that's especially on longer mini retirements, that tends to be on the high end. It's odd. There again, the math is confusing, but oftentimes, especially with slow travel, people end up spending somewhat similar to what they spend at home if they travel affordably. And I interviewed one guy on my podcast from a high cost of living area. I think they were in like Boston or something. They like late 30s, early 40s, had two little kids in daycare, and they moved to France for a year. They both quit their jobs and moved to France for a year, kind of a rural part of France. In that year in France, they spent less than they were just spending on childcare back in Boston. Their total cost was less than just their childcare cost. So it was significantly cheaper than living their life back in Boston. But yeah, if you're not sure what you want to do, aim for that 50%. I have kind of this formula. If you're early, starting off in your career, like what if you took a month off every other year? And with this, if you have to replace 100% of your salary and 50% bonus, that's saving an additional 6.5%, which isn't a ton of money, but it would unlock this lifetime of incredible experiences. And by the time you get to FI or regular retirement, like you have these highlights of your life that you've accumulated.
I was going to say, you need to have Justin on your podcast once he gets back, because
Yes!
what you're saying is so true. Like, he just did 4 months in Southeast Asia, and his cost was $45 per day. And he's renting out his house in Austin, so he's making money while he's traveling. It's just like, so many of these things can come together, and you don't realize just like how much you can kind of wiggle your personal finances a bit if you're willing to get a little bit creative and a little bit outside of the box. So there's just like, I just love this. I do want to get tactical, because I think a lot of people who are listening, they're in their corporate job and they're like, this sounds awesome, but I can't just go take 3 months off. I can't take 6 months off. You spent a pretty good chunk of the book, and in the workbook as well, kind of outlining, almost giving people like scripts and prompts for like, hey, I'm giving you a heads up. Like, I'm going to be doing this thing for X amount of time. And then you also talk about like, if you actually want to leave your job, negotiating severance, all that stuff. I guess let's start smallest and work our way up. How does someone go and get, a month off from their job? That's typically, that's not very common in most 9-to-5s.
It hasn't been very common, but I think there is a growing awareness. And so I always encourage people, like, this isn't something to just like drop in your employer's lap and make it their problem, because their plate is full. Their job is full. They're busy. They got their own crap to deal with. Like, they don't now have to solve all of your problems. So do all of the mental and emotional work up front ahead of time. Figure out some of the logistics. And in the book, I talk about like practice radical empathy. Really try to put yourself in their position. What are the fears they're going to have? What are the concerns? What are the problems they're going to see pop up? And they're going to, another counterintuitive piece of advice, but when you have that first conversation, articulate, verbalize those concerns they might have for them. Because it can be really tough to, even as an employer, to like say all the reasons you don't think this is going to work. And they might be great at doing that when it's like a work idea and they're like, yeah, that idea is stupid. It's never going to work. But when you're coming and saying, I'm really burned out, there's this stuff going on with my family, there's this thing I really want to do, to just be like, yeah, that's stupid, it's not going to work, is a little bit harder. And when I worked in sales, I realized one of the greatest, most generous gifts a customer can give you is telling you why they don't want to buy. What is their hesitation? What is their concern? If they will tell you that, it's like, now we have something to work with. Oh my gosh, now I can help problem solve this. So you want to start this really creative, collaborative approach. And one of the things that I encourage people, and this is kind of, it sounds silly, but oh my gosh, it works so good, is giving a heads up email. So do not sneak attack. Do not sneak attack them, but give a brief heads up email that kind of alludes to what this conversation is going to be about. And it can be like, hey, hope you're having a great week. I was wondering if we could touch base next week, maybe on Wednesday. There's this extended travel I've been thinking about, and I would love to figure out a way to make that work in addition to my current PTO. And so you're not telling them your whole plan. It's not like there's not an outline, there's not 4 paragraphs, but just a little heads up, because people will go through, and it sounds silly, but they'll kind of go through the stages of grief. First, it's like anger, like, how dare you? You're going to make my life so much harder. And then it's a little bit of denial, like, well, there's absolutely no way this is going to happen. Like, just forget it. But then they slowly get to bargaining, and you want them to move through anger and denial over the weekend when you're not in front of them. So when you have this meeting on Wednesday, they're firmly in this bargaining mindset of like, how do we make this happen? And your highest point of leverage is the willingness to leave. Because any problem that they can make disappear by just saying no, and you just go back to your desk and keep working, like, so much easier. So if it's between you taking a month off and them just being able to say no, people are going to do whatever's easiest and cheapest and simplest. But it changes the equation if you say, here are the 2 options. I get a month off, or I leave and you have to replace me and hire someone new and train them and just pray to God that they're as good as I am at this job. Now they have 2 problems to choose from. And your job to negotiate this is to make your month off the easiest, simplest, cheapest solution between these 2. And it's highly effective. And if it's not, because occasionally it's not, occasionally an employer is like, F you, I don't care. Like, get back to you're having a mental breakdown, whatever. You have goals. I wish you were a robot, actually. But then you're like, okay, I get where I'm working and I can see the expiration date on this particular job. And then you can make kind of a more informed plan moving forward.
So let's see if I got this right. So for the heads up type of email, you are, or just heads up in general, you're alleviating, you're kind of presenting the problems first. So it's like, hey, I want to take this month off in a couple of months from now. I know that you're probably going to be concerned about X, Y, and Z, but don't worry. I'm going to be walking Jim through exactly what I'm doing. Like, he's going to handle my clients or whatever while I'm gone.
I wouldn't do that in the heads up email. No, heads up is like 2 or 3 sentences.
Okay.
It's like, hey, I've got some extended travel plans this summer. I would love to kind of work on a plan of how we can figure this out. I wouldn't even say like how long you're planning, exactly what you're planning, but just alluding to the fact you're going to be negotiating a leave of absence. Because you don't want them to start kind of coming up with all of the specific reasons it won't work. We'll deal with the specifics in the conversation. But then when you get to that in-person meeting, you lay out, and I talk a lot about in the book, like how to create that narrative of what your trip's going to look like or what your thing that you're doing is going to be, because it can be real easy to let someone else set the narrative and you kind of need to get ahead of it. And I have memoir rules. So the 2 rules for this is it 100% has to be true. It's not a place for lying. 100% has to be true. And the second rule is it cannot be the whole truth. Just like in a memoir, if you try to include every detail and every story and every nuance, you lose the plot. So pick the amount of truth it all has to be true, but pick the amount of truth you want to share and trim that thing down. Do not make it sprawling, not a sprawling amount of truth. So make it, and try to make it positive, make it something interesting. Ideally, make it something specific. And as a bonus, if it can be a one-time event, you're like, I'm going to do this one thing one time, and then I'm going to be back to work at 100%. And so that could be, let's say your 30th birthday's coming up and you're like, hey, I've always wanted to train for like a triathlon. I always wanted to do this by the time I was 30. Now that's coming up like in 6 months. I would
Are you
love
using
it
this
if
as a random example, Jillian, or have you been stalking me? Because I have wanted to do I turned 30 in February, and I've been wanting to do an Ironman this year. That's such a weird
It's
example to
awesome.
pick. Okay, sorry to
It's
cut you off
funny.
there, but wow.
But yeah, I want to do this thing, and they have this event in Hawaii. It's amazing. I would love to go, but I've got 2 weeks of leave. I'll probably need an extra 2 weeks unpaid to make this happen. It's positive, it's interesting, it's specific. You're doing a specific thing versus I think I just want to like get in better shape. Not specific enough because people can really resonate with specific goals. They can resonate with things that are interesting and positive. And if it's one time, it doesn't feel like a huge risk. It's not like, oh, Cody's going to be like every 6 months, he's going to want to take off for some other like physical challenge. Like, no, I just want to do one Ironman, one time. And then I'm good.
All right. Well, thank you for getting into these specifics there. Sounds like I would not have got my vacation approved if I went with my approach. So I'm glad you were able to give us the better approach for a higher percentage of yes. But let's go to the no scenario where your boss is like, you know what? It sounds like you're having a mental health breakdown. Screw you. Like you're not getting a month off. Let's talk about quitting and what that looks like. And I know you have some tips on like getting a severance and like how to quit the right way rather than just storming out and maybe kind of screwing yourself and putting yourself in a bad situation.
Yeah, the answer might be no. Or what I see more often is people are like, I don't want to come back to this job. Like, I'm ready to switch jobs. And so I'm just going to put in my notice because, like, I'm done with this company. I want to go take a mini retirement, find a new company. But even in that scenario, I call it an exit negotiation. So you're going to leave, but you're going to negotiate as you're leaving. And a lot of times people push back me like, there's no way they won't give me anything. Like there's no upside. And I encourage people, especially if you're like under 50, this is an important skill set. These are important conversations to learn how to have. And this is the best opportunity to practice because you're never going to see these suckers again. So like practice your skill set and then say goodbye forever. And then you take this skill set into your next job where it'll be super valuable. But you don't have any of that weirdness of like relational tension because you negotiated something. So even if just for practice, get the practice. We don't have a lot of opportunities in life to practice this kind of skill set. So the exit negotiation is thinking about essentially what are you willing to offer your employer to make your transition out of the company easier, smoother, more effective. Maybe you're willing to stay on for 4 months. Maybe you're willing to help hire your replacement. Maybe you're willing to help train your replacement. Maybe you have a big project. Maybe you're willing to come back in every Friday for a month to help wrap up that big project after you leave. So you think about all the things that you could offer, and then you think about what would I like in return? What would be beneficial to me? And that might be, and this sounds bizarro, it might be a pay raise for those remaining 4 months. I had a client, that exact scenario, actually, she was going to quit. She was like, I'm done with these people. They're never going to give me a mini retirement. I'm just going to quit. I was like, okay, well, let's do that. And she was like, I'll give them 4 months. They were coming up in like the really busy season. She was super essential for these 4 months. And I was like, okay, that's cool. So when you quit, I want you to ask for a raise. And she was like, wait, what? Like, wait, no, like the same, I'm quitting. And in the same conversation, I'm asking for a raise. I'm like, yep, here's how we're going to do this. So she gathered, here's the research of here's what my market rate is. And it was about 20% higher than what she was getting paid. And she got paid a fair amount. So it was like a big chunk of money. And so she said, I'm willing to stay on. I'm willing to do these 4 months. I'm willing to do X, Y, and Z. In return, I would appreciate, which is kind of our key phrase. In return, I would appreciate, and here's the other key word, fairly, to be fairly compensated for my remaining time. They instantly said yes. Like, yes, absolutely.
Wow.
Because you don't want to lose your best, most important person in like the 4 most important months. And all she's asking is to be fairly compensated. Like, easy no-brainer. So think about in return, I would appreciate, and for some people, it's just like, I would appreciate every Friday off. I'm willing to stay for these 4 months. I just want every Friday off, or I want to work from home 3 days a week, or I don't want to do that stupid project. I hate that project. I'll work on this project over here, but I'm not doing that thing. Or these last 4 months, I'm not going to manage people. Like, I'll do my project work, but start to hand off this management of people to someone else, because that's a pain for me. It might be having your bonus paid out on time, having your vesting done ahead of schedule. There's a lot of things that you could potentially receive in return. And kind of the coolest, crazy thing about this is once you start to negotiate things, and once you get good at that, and once you become the exception to the rule, so frequently you can become the exception to other rules. Like in the case of our 20% raise person, she swore to me she would never get a mini retirement. And they got closer to the end of this 4 months and they were like, okay, so we know you really want the summer off, but like, would you come back in the fall? Like, would you consider? And she was
Wow.
like, I mean, maybe if I could get every summer off. And they're like, we can talk about that. We can talk about that. Like, it's
Wow.
so people sometimes end up negotiating coming back on a part-time basis or coming back as contract workers, or they get to the end of this and they're like, oh, like, would you consider coming back in this other role? And if you were like, I'm so done with this company, I'm not interested, the best way to handle that conversation is to say, thank you so much. That's a really interesting idea. I would love to loop back around to that in about 6 months. 6 months into my mini retirement, could we have another conversation? Like, you don't have to decide right now. You don't have to commit because you're burned out and you're tired and you need a break. Like, go rest, recover, become creative and motivated again, and then make that decision if you want to come back to the company in some capacity.
And guys, Jillian's book and workbook is packed with the things you can negotiate, because I didn't even realize some of the things you can negotiate. Like the things that you were just talking about with your friend, most people wouldn't even assume that's something that they can negotiate. Like nobody
Yeah.
gets time off, nobody can work remote. It's like this person thought that, and all of a sudden now they're negotiating getting every summer off in perpetuity. Like you just don't know what you don't know until you try things. One thing I
Yeah.
want to loop back to, because I think this is a really important part of these mini retirements, and this is kind of toward the end of the book and the workbook, is the check-ins. So I wanted to make sure
Mm,
we had a little time to talk about that, because I think it's so important. Because if you take 3 months off to, recover from burnout or travel or do whatever, but then in the middle of month two, you're like, what the heck am I doing? Like I'm not really feeling recovered. I'm not doing the things I set out to do. I know you talk about like scheduling check-in meetings and kind of
yeah.
hitting milestones along the way and checking to make sure that the reason you took the mini retirement, you're actually doing the things you set out to do. So could you talk a little bit about what those check-in meetings are and how to structure those?
Yeah, I think this is the most important tool in the
Okay, I'm
workbook.
glad
I
I asked
actually,
then.
in my group coaching this week, we're in step 4 and we were going through this tool, and I was like, guys, this might be. I know we've done like a lot of exercises because it's 16 weeks, and like you said, 100 pages. I'm like, but this is the probably if you only do one, please do this one, because and I kind of joke about it, but we'll take the group coaching as a perfect example because it is 100-page workbook. It is videos for every single exercise, and it is 16 weeks of weekly calls. Like, it is not a little thing. Um, and I tell people you will come out with 60% of a plan, and 40% of your plan will be make believe. If you do all this work, you're going to get 60% of a plan, which sounds like a horrible guarantee. But there's so many assumptions because you haven't done it yet. You're not in it yet. And the only way you swap out that make believe, like the fiction for the fact, is by doing these weekly check ins, kind of running these experiments. Okay, I assume that if I do this kind of active rest, I'm going to feel more rested at the end of the week. But at the end of the week, you need to sit down and kind of like the scientific method, you had your assumption, you kind of had your variables, be curious and be observant and see, how did that actually work? Did it meet my intention? My intention was to recover from burnout. Do I think that's working? Do I enjoy this? Um, Take that information, incorporate that fact, replace it with the fiction and the assumptions we had, and then make that small pivot and do it again the next week, because it will go off the rails. Because even like I said, this is a very thorough plan and it's only 60%. Most people, if you don't do any of this, you're going with like a 10% plan. It's 10% fact, it is 90% fiction. So having these opportunities to adjust course, and especially if you have other people in your life who have expectations of this time. If you have a partner, if you have kids, if you have parents, if you have friends that would be like, well, I thought on your mini retirement, like you would take the kids to the dentist or you would do the shopping. Or I thought your mom might be like, well, I thought because you're not working over Christmas, instead of being here for 3 days, you would be here for 9 days, like, because you don't have to go back to work this year. Or I thought because you were taking this time off, like we could go out to lunch every day, and your friend might not realize, actually, my main intention is like building a side hustle during this season. But having those conversations up front, what are your expectations? How can I meet them? How can we compromise? How can you understand what my goals are? Mini retirements. It was funny. One of the ladies in the group coaching was like, I know this is about mini retirements, but it's like a lot of like life coaching. Like these are just important life skills. And I'm like, because mini retirements are like life expanded. You have to have like a bigger, better skill set. And one of those is setting boundaries with people. Your work was an amazing excuse. It was an amazing boundary that everyone in your life respected. If you said, hey, I can't do that thing tonight, I have to work late, everyone's like, no problem. Totally cool. If they invite you to do that thing and you're like, hey, I had a nap scheduled because I'm recovering from burnout, they don't get it. They don't respect it. They don't like it. I had a client who her intention for that phase was to work on her side hustle. And her family kept asking her to babysit in emergencies. And if you just had a 9 to 5 job, it's easy to say, shoot, so sorry, would love to. I can't. I have to go to work today. But when everyone knows you're not working, you actually have to navigate that conversation. And you have to say, this is my goal and this is my intention and here's my boundaries. And these are skill sets that you might not have had to flex or really refine because the work did so much of that heavy lifting for you.
One that I've come to love and use, because I struggle with this a lot when I quit my job. I don't have an excuse anymore why I can't hang out with you or do that thing. I always say, no, my plate is full. And a full plate can mean whatever to whoever. So a full plate could be a nap, a run, hanging out with my family. It doesn't have to be work necessarily. Like to your point, I don't want to lie and be like, oh, I have so much work or this and that. My plate is full is what works for me. So that's a little trick I've learned, and it's helped me say no without pissing people off.
Yeah, it can be tough on a mini retirement because people assume you're doing nothing.
Fair enough.
They're like, well, with what? You quit your job. Like, you're just home all
bunch
day.
Of stuff.
Like,
I don't know.
But these weekly check-ins, checking in on if you're worried about the financials, in the thing, I have like sample questions that you can use for each category. If you're worried about finding the next job, you're like, the economy, I don't know. Will I be able to find my next job? Do your weekly check-ins around that, where you say, what have I been hearing on the job market? I've been looking on job sites. What am I seeing out there? Am I doing my networking? Does that feel promising? And if things feel like they're trending in a bad direction, then you can decide, should I leave my mini retirement earlier? Should I start applying for jobs earlier than I thought I would need to, because it might take 2 or 3 or 4 months to find one instead of 2 weeks? And then you can incorporate that information and make those choices so you're not just nervous all the time and scared all the time of like, I don't know if this is working. Am I spending too much money? Like, can I find a new job? Just do the weekly check-in, review the information that you've learned, and incorporate that.
So speaking of a full plate, before we round this thing out, let's give people a sampler. I'm hoping you can share your favorite mini retirement, your best mini retirement for whatever reasons, why it impacted your life so much, and kind of how it was structured. So just so people can kind of visualize what this looks like, a real tangible example.
Oh my gosh. Impossible. So I've taken a dozen of them. And like I said, they're Swiss Army knife. So many different options. And so there's been a lot of really cool travel ones. I just want to talk about all of them.
I know I'm like asking who your favorite kid is basically with these mini
I
retirement
know,
questions.
I know. You know, so a quick preview. I did a month in my 20s, and I did a month of like 6 hour a day intensive outpatient therapy. Highly recommend. But especially by like your mid to late 20s, just reboot that whole thing. Sort out everything that happened the first 27 years. Get that foundation rebuilt. Like, don't chip away at this for like 40 years. Just like factory reset. There again, huge capital investment. The tango, I did a month for tango. And like, oftentimes one of the things I think about is what would my 80-year-old self say? How would my 80-year-old self feel about this? And I thought about her, and she was like, absolutely do it. Like, I want all of those things. I want all of those friendships. I want that social activity. I want that physical activity. I want that mental stimulation. I want to have this great hobby that I could do, like travel with and build community around. She was like, I want all of those things. Absolutely take a month off. And I was like, okay, I'm in it to win it. But the example I want to share that might be helpful for your audience is I took, like I mentioned, I took this 10-week trip with my kiddos, 5 kiddos in the pop-up camper, 10 national parks. It's not super expensive. Like our pop-up camper, I think we spent like 3,500 for it, and then we sold it for I think 3,500. So, and we used it hard, but not super expensive. But incredible, like my kids were just like the perfect age. They were kind of like that 2 to 11, where they just like loved spending time with us, and they loved everything we did, and everything was exciting and epic and cool. And we went to Disney, and we went to the beach, and we did like Yellowstone and Arches and Canyonlands and Zion and Grand Canyon, Joshua Tree, Sequoia, Yosemite, up the West Coast. And I had that feeling of, oh, this season's passing. Like, I can't do this in 20 years. When they're all in their 20s, there's no way they're going to do 10 weeks in a pop-up camper with me to 10 national parks. Like, I do it now or I don't do it. And the crazier side of that too was like, so I was like super happily married for 22 years. And we had this incredible trip with me and my spouse and our kids. And I gave them these incredible memories. And then very unexpectedly, that marriage ended. And I knew the season of my kids being little would end. I knew that that was finite. I had no idea that this other relationship was also finite. And now I appreciate and I'm so grateful for those trips because it literally will never happen again. I had this one moment to give myself and my kids like this incredible gift. And I didn't know that like I wouldn't be able to do this indefinitely. And so I think regret or fear of regret is the counterbalance to like the fear of risk. If you don't do this, would you massively regret missing this opportunity and like emotionally feel that? I know mini retirements are a hassle. They 100% are a hassle. They're difficult, they're logistical, there's planning, they're expensive. Like it's so much work up front. And in the rearview mirror, the work, that hassle kind of fades. You kind of forget all the logistics of this 10-week trip. Like it was stressful. It was hassle. We like rented out our house. Like you had to get it all clean. Like it's like a stressful week. Like leaving for any vacation stressful, leaving for a 10-week vacation super stressful. But in the rearview mirror, the meaningfulness and the joy and like the highlight of your life, like that expands and it gets bigger and bigger and it becomes more and more valuable as the decades of your life go on.
All right, that is a fantastic place to end. I have the chills. I don't know if you can see my arm hair here, but my mom's boyfriend actually says a very similar thing where he's getting
Mm.
older, and he says, like, I never know when the last time I'm going to be doing this thing is, whether it's kayaking or bowling, or he's big into sailing.
Yeah.
So he's like, every time I go out and do it, I just appreciate it so much. And it sounds like you
Yeah.
had the same exact experience on this camping trip with your family. Jillian, I know you are a wealth of information. Like I said, I mean, there's a 107-page workbook in addition to the 300-page regular book. You have a lot going on. For those who want to take next steps, or just want to hear more from you and want to learn more about retiring often and mini retirements, where do you want to point our listeners?
Yeah, retireoften.com. I've got a bunch of free worksheets of like how to negotiate a month off, like 50 cool things you can do in a month. Like if you just want to get some of those tactical tools and inspiration, I've got a podcast called Retire Often. If you want to hear other people's mini retirement stories, like I'm not the only one that's done this. But yeah, for group coaching or one-on-one coaching or the workbook, like it's all there. And the book will be coming out in September 9th. And I'm excited about it because I've worked hundreds of people through this process. And so it's not just like mini retirements are cool. Here's exactly how to pull this off step by step. Here's every way to make this as like bulletproof as possible and as awesome as possible. And I think it really will encourage people to give it a go and give them the tools to make it actually happen.
Well, thank you so much for your time today, Jillian. You're awesome. You're amazing. You're inspiring. I am sure that some of the folks from our audience who are listening right now are going to take that leap. Hopefully, we just pushed them, gentle nudge over the edge into your community, into the Retire Often life. And yeah, I just want to say I appreciate you and our friendship. And it's been awesome to see you, transform over the years and share so much wisdom with our audience.
Always good to see you again.